When I first subscribed to the Marvel Ultimate Graphic Novel Collection, I had no idea what titles were coming my way, or at least very little. Early advertising promoted the first 3 issues, and there was a page in the back of every volume which highlighted a couple of the upcoming titles, but other than that I didn't know what I was in for. The volumes were issued out of sequence, so it took until issue 29 for me to get volume 1, which was the Iron Man story, Demon in a Bottle. Now by this point I'd worked out that the volumes were roughly chronological, so by getting this 1979 Iron Man tale as the first volume, I knew I wouldn't be getting any classic stories by Stan Lee or Jack Kirby, not to mention other creators of the same era like Gene Colan, Steve Ditko, John Romita Sr. I was surprised. I mean, this is Marvel's ultimate graphic novel collection. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby are the original architects of the Marvel Universe. They drew up the blueprints and laid the foundations. Why wouldn't they be included in this 60-volume collection? And it wasn't just about wanting to see their work, it was about wanting to see the debuts of classic characters like the Fantastic Four or the Incredible Hulk, or classic storylines like the coming of Galactus or the death of Gwen Stacy. But these were classic stories that Marvel apparently didn't deem worthy of its own ultimate graphic novel collection. But why? At a certain point, Marvel or Hachette or somebody decided that the initial 60 volumes were selling well enough that they should expand the line. And at this point, they introduced another 40 volumes designated classics that included all the artists and characters from the 60s and 70s that I thought I'd missed out on. Now these classics were given Roman numerals on the spine instead of regular numbers, so that you could shelve them at the start of your collection and retain the chronology and the spine art. So finally I had all the historic and important Marvel comics that I'd wanted. I still didn't know why they'd been held back or excluded from the initial run of 60 titles, but it didn't matter, because now I could read them and find out for myself. So I started with Marvel Origins of the 60s. This is the first volume of the classics books. It contains the debut of Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Daredevil, the Incredible Hulk, the X-Men. This book basically contains the birth of the Marvel Universe. And it starts with Fantastic Four issue 1. And I've read it, and I'm beginning to see why they didn't include it in the initial collection. I thought the early run of Fantastic Four might be a little dated, but I wasn't prepared for it to just not be very good. I actively found this book a slog to get through. The plot and action were hokey, and it actually felt like work wading through the cheesy exposition-heavy dialogue. The art is okay, but the Thing, in particular, is a shadow of his future self. Plus there's a massive plot hole in the story's conclusion. Now there is one funny bit near the start of the issue. A point is made of how much Johnny Storm loves cars, and he's shown in the garage getting a tune-up. But the moment he gets the call to go help out his fantastic friends, he leaves his beloved motor as molten mess. Plus, it's a pretty cool moment when the team come across Mole Man's diamond lair. But overall, I wouldn't be putting this in my top 60 volumes of Marvel Comics either. There's really not much to recommend about it. Now, obviously Stan and Jack deserve endless credit for their creativity, invention and innovation. If Jack Kirby's art looks dated, it's because he basically defined how comic books looked for a generation. The plots might be a little hokey, but they invented the mythology our favourite characters are still based on. Other writers and artists might later handle the characters more deftly, but they couldn't have done it without building on the work of these two guys, or their 60s contemporaries. To give an example, I love these pictures of Venom, but they wouldn't exist without Todd McFarlane creating this, which is clearly based off of this black Spider-Man outfit from Secret Wars drawn by Mick Zeck. The black suit is clearly a twist on Spidey's classic red and blue look, and you can trace that back all the way to Stan and Jack's colleague Steve Ditko. But as important as these early comics are, there's no use pretending the medium hasn't moved forward and left this stuff looking dated. It's why most people find Citizen Kane easier to admire than earnestly enjoy. Marvel wanted to sell subscribers this collection, but they also wanted to hook as many new people as possible and make them Marvel fans who would buy more comics. It makes sense to weight the collection towards more modern accessible books that better reflect the current product. Now, don't worry, obviously I'm not about to dismiss these two comics icons based on one issue of one comic, so from there I skipped ahead to the 4th volume in the classic series, that being Fantastic Four: The Coming of Galactus. More Fantastic Four issues by the same creative team. The book starts with a Fantastic Four annual, an extra long story about the wedding of Reed Richards and Sue Storm. Of course, the big day doesn't go quite to plan, and before vows can be exchanged, the Fantastic Four have to fight off a whole gang of supervillains determined to spoil the day. Now, as luck would have it, the wedding guests include a bunch of other superheroes who help them battle it out. For kids buying this at the time, it must have been a thrill to see all their favourite comic book heroes fighting side by side, particularly as this was way before giant multi-title crossovers were a thing. But squeezing in so many heroes and villains doesn't leave much room for character arcs or plot development. But then again, it's not really trying for that. It's a simple story, simply told. The villains interrupt before the wedding is underway, the heroes intervene to save the day, and then they crack on with the nuptials. If only the villains had held off a bit, they might have actually interrupted the ceremony, which would have added a little bit of drama. But ultimately, some kids got to see all their favourite do-gooders biffing the bad guys, and that's fine. There's a good example in this issue of how some of Jack's character designs have been improved by more recent iterations. For example, the Watcher usually appears with an iconic bulbous head, but here Kirby depicts him looking more like Phil Mitchell from EastEnders. Sharon, I'm forbidden to interfere in human events. Does that sound Cockney?
Yes it does.
Okay, good. On the other hand, you can already see Kirby's refinement of his characters over time. The Thing is looking much more like his iconic self here, rather than the pretty basic rock monster from the first issue. Plus, just for the record, I love whenever Kirby draws Reed Richards looking steely and determined. It's just really great. After Fantastic Four Annual 3, things improved pretty rapidly. Stan and Jack have been writing Fantastic Four for over 3 years by now, and it shows. The plots are more engaging, and while it's still a bit cheesy, there's a certain charm to some of the dialogue. Now, it turns out this run of issues leading up to the arrival of Galactus also features the first appearance of the Inhumans, an offshoot of the human race who've used genetic science to speed up their evolution. Though, from what research I've been able to do, there's no in-universe reason why they dress so badly. Now, to be honest, the Inhumans have turned up in a few other titles I've read, and I've never really warmed to them. They always seem to me like a kind of low-rent X-Men, a superhero team with a similar sense of otherness but less cool and with none of the social commentary. I don't like their costumes, and I've found it hard to engage with their stoic leader Black Bolt, who doesn't speak. It's not just me that's drawn the comparison to X-Men, by the way. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that for a while Marvel wanted Inhumans to supplant mutants in both comics and the MCU, because Fox still owned the movie rights for X-Men. Now Disney have bought Fox out, that isn't really a problem, but that's another video for another day. Anyway, these early appearances didn't exactly make me fall in love with the Inhumans, but seeing how they started out did give me a better understanding and appreciation for the characters. The characters I had been looking forward to were Galactus and the Silver Surfer, but when they did turn up I was a little disappointed. I was keen to see how Reed Richards and company dealt with such a powerful entity, but it seems like the Watcher did most of the work. Come to think of it, he also provided the crucial weapon in the wedding story. For a guy who claims he can't intervene in human events, he sure likes to save the day a lot. All in all, these comics were okay. They weren't a slog, but neither were they gripping. Some of the stories are a little silly, like there's an evil Inhuman who wants to kill all human life, so he uses a special gun to cause vibrations that will kill all the humans on Earth, but it doesn't work because humans just don't die from vibrations, I guess? Keen as I had been to read about the Inhumans, the Silver Surfer and Galactus, my favourite story in this volume is actually the last issue featuring none of those characters. It's a self-contained, charming little morality play about a man whose jealousy of Reed Richards leads him to steal the Thing's identity in order to get close to Reed and kill him. However, by getting closer to Reed, this unnamed scientist learns how dedicated, hard-working and selfless Mr. Fantastic really is, and he begins to regret his former jealousy. By this time, however, it's too late and the wheels of his plan are already in deadly motion. Reed is adrift in the negative zone and with no way back, so, to save Reed, the scientist performs a selfless act of his own, using the Thing's powers and sacrificing his own life in the process to save the day. Look, it's not exactly Watchmen, but it's a charming tale effectively told. I wasn't bored by these stories, but neither was I in any particular rush for more of the same, which is a shame, because the next volume in the series is more Lee and Kirby Fantastic Four stories. I still think a more modern take on the Fantastic Four is a better introduction for a newer reader such as myself, and Marvel obviously agree because they included several more modern takes in the initial run of 60 books. My favourite of which is the 2 volumes dedicated to Mark Waid's run on the characters, Unthinkable and Authoritative Action. Both these books are really fun and entertaining. They've got an engrossing story, satisfying conclusion, and the artwork's great as well. And they also find a way to pay tribute to Jack Kirby in a way that I'm not going to spoil here, but is really fun. Suffice to say, you can find a way to keep a connection to Marvel's past and celebrate the architects of the Marvel Universe without putting dated comics in front of new readers who haven't acquired a taste for them. Something I've not mentioned is that these original 60s comics were never actually aimed at grown men in their mid-30s. I think maybe the best audience for these comics are still the ones they originally intended for, kids. The writing isn't too complex or sophisticated, the stories are fun, and kids who aren't already familiar with the characters can enjoy all the amazing creativity with fresh eyes. Plus, kids will be a little bit less cynical about some of the logic leaps and dubious science. That said, I wouldn't actually give these comic books to a kid. For a start, there are some, let's call it, traditional attitudes to marriage and gender roles. Sue Reed has some pretty impressive superpowers, but she isn't treated as an equal member of the team. She's often worrying about her hair or why Reed isn't paying her enough attention. There's a moment where the Fantastic Four are falling, and Sue, with her force field powers, is the only one who can save the day. But she doesn't think of that for herself. Johnny Storm suggests it, only for her to say, yeah, Reed already told me. I mean, Stan Lee gives Sue no agency here. If I was falling but had the power to project a force field to break my fall, I'd hope I could work that out for myself, but here Stan has 2 men tell her to do it. Then, when she saved them all, she doesn't get any thanks or praise. No, Reed gets the credit because he did such a good job of telling her to do it. It's like if I invited my friend Phil round, and we're sat in our house having fun, me, him and my fiancée Ellie, and then Ellie says, actually, do you know what, I'm feeling a bit hungry. Chris, can you go and put some food on? So I go out to the kitchen and I cook up some sirloin steaks to perfection, and I do some sides with it to go with it, and I bring it all back through, serve it all up, and we're eating, and Phil says, these steaks are perfect, and the sides are great as well, this is delicious. And I'm sat there thinking, great, I'm going to get some praise for this. And then Phil says, well done, Ellie, good work telling Chris to cook like that. I'm going to be a little bit miffed. Now, all of this stuff with Sue Storm might be generously described as of its time, but there's one plot thread in particular that is pretty troubling. Johnny Storm is out walking on the streets when he spots an attractive woman. So he tries to talk to her, but he startles her. In fact, he notices he's done that. He actually uses the word recoiled. It's right here. And she says, he tries to talk to her, she says, no, you mustn't. But that doesn't stop him from trying to talk to her, even after she asks him not to and begs to be left alone. So he does what anyone would do, right? He decides to return every day to the same part of the neighbourhood until he can spot her again. Now, eventually he does find her again, and she once more yells at him to stay away and tries to escape, but he chases her, lies to her to gain her trust, and then they fall in love. Just a reminder, Johnny Storm is one of the book's heroes. Look, I'm not saying that the Fantastic Four should be cancelled in either sense of the word. I'm not even saying that these specific issues shouldn't be available. Yes, the gender politics have aged poorly, but they can still be enjoyed with an understanding of the context. It's just that kids don't have the maturity to understand that context. Now, I'm sure there are people watching this who probably think I'm a social justice warrior or a snowflake, and they'll say, well, I read those issues when I was a kid and it never did me any harm. To which I say, didn't it? I mean, you just called me a snowflake, so what does that say? Kids absolutely absorb and internalise ideas about gender and identity that they get from the media and the world around them. However hard our parents try, all of us end up teeming with misapprehensions and ingrained assumptions, and they can take years to unpick, and that's even if we're trying. I'm not saying that every little boy who reads these comics is going to turn into an incel or an abuser, but Johnny Storm's attitude to romance is the sort of thing that makes boys think no means try harder, and turning up at a girl's house unannounced when you know she's alone is romantic rather than creepy. Ultimately, taste is subjective, and some people will lap up these Silver Age comics, but personally, I couldn't recommend them. I'm not saying people who enjoy them are wrong. They're not bad, but there are so many Marvel titles to choose from. If you're looking to get into Marvel comics, I would really recommend you start with something a bit more modern, and don't feel obligated to read these things just because they're revered as classics. I've heard Silver Age comics described as an acquired taste, but comics can get expensive. And I just think, why fork out the money to acquire a taste for something when you could just buy something more modern and accessible that you're going to enjoy from the get-go? Meanwhile, Marvel will keep finding ways to pay tribute to Stan and Jack and give them the credit they absolutely deserve. That doesn't always mean giving us more Stan and Jack comics to read. Okay, that about wraps it up, but before I go, I'd like to thank Ellie Daniel, whose thoughts helped shape the ideas in this video. If you've enjoyed this video, then feel free to share it around with anyone else you think might like it. That'd be appreciated. Also, if you'd like to donate to my Ko-fi account, that helps keep my cats fed. And you can like and subscribe. There is no shame in it. Thank you. Bye.